Jacob Caldwell was a man of control. As a renowned architect, his life was designed with the same precision as the buildings he created, structured, orderly, with no room for chaos. His career thrived, his home functioned like a well-oiled machine, and his son Oliver was raised in absolute stability. But in a single moment, everything he had meticulously built came undone. As he passed by the large window of his home, Jacob's gaze froze. Out in the garden, his 12-year-old son Oliver was dancing. But he wasn't alone. Standing beside him, guiding his every movement, was Sofia Bennett, the family's housekeeper, a woman Jacob had barely given a second thought to since she started working 6 months ago. Jacob blinked, convinced his mind was playing tricks on him, but no, Oliver was truly dancing. And what unsettled Jacob the most wasn't just the act itself. It was the way his son was smiling. Jacob stood frozen by the window, unable to tear his eyes away from the sight before him. Oliver danced with hesitant, unsteady steps, far from perfect, but filled with determination. He stumbled slightly, nearly tripping, but instead of frustration, he laughed, a genuine carefree sound Jacob hadn't heard in years. Ever since his wife's passing, Oliver had withdrawn into himself, locking away his emotions. Jacob had tried to compensate by giving him everything: stability, structure, a life free of chaos. Yet now, right before his eyes, Sofia Bennett, a mere housekeeper, was doing something Jacob had failed to do. She was making his son smile again, and Jacob didn't like it. Sophia moved with an elegance that didn't belong to a housekeeper. Every step was precise, deliberate, not the playful improvisation of an amateur, but the execution of someone who had been trained. She wasn't just entertaining Oliver, she was teaching him, guiding him. A cold unease settled in Jacob's chest. He didn't like the idea of a stranger holding such influence over his son. With sharp, purposeful strides, he stepped outside. Oliver was the first to notice him. The boy instantly froze, his earlier joy vanishing into apprehension. But Sophia remained composed. She simply wiped her hands on her apron before standing up to meet Jacob's piercing gaze. "What is going on here?" His voice was cool, controlled. Oliver lowered his head, unable to answer. But Sophia, unwavering, met Jacob's stare without hesitation. "We were practicing, sir," she said simply. "Practicing what?" "Your son wants to learn how to dance." Jacob turned to Oliver. "Since when?" The boy hesitated for a moment before murmuring, "For a while now." A sharp pang of guilt struck Jacob's chest. Why hadn't he noticed? Jacob stared at his son, an unsettling frustration curling in his chest. Why had Oliver never told him? "And why didn't you tell me?" His voice was low, firm, not raised but heavy with unspoken authority. Oliver only shrugged, his small shoulders sinking slightly under the weight of his father's gaze. Before he could respond, Sophia spoke, her tone calm but unwavering. "Because he had no one to practice with." Jacob turned to her, narrowing his eyes. There was something in her voice, something steady, unshaken, that irritated him. "That's not your job," he stated coldly. Sophia didn't flinch. "No, it isn't." "Then why are you doing it?" She folded her arms, her expression unreadable. "Because he asked me to." Jacob looked back at Oliver. "Is that true?" Oliver nodded, though his eyes held a flicker of hesitation. A heavy silence stretched between them. Jacob inhaled slowly, trying to contain the irritation gnawing at the edges of his composure. He had no logical reason to be this bothered, yet he was. Something about this entire situation felt off. Jacob wasn't the kind of man who ignored his instincts. In business, they had never failed him, helping him build an empire on knowing when something wasn't as it seemed. And right now, those same instincts told him Sofia Bennett was not just a housekeeper. Without another word, Jacob turned and walked back into the house. Yet as he stepped inside, he cast a glance over his shoulder, just in time to see Oliver lean in and whisper something to Sophia. She tilted her head, responding in a voice too soft to hear. Oliver let out a small, conspiratorial smile. A chill ran down Jacob's spine. There was more to this than met the eye, and he was determined to uncover it. Jacob sat in his office, fingers steepled beneath his chin, his eyes locked onto his computer screen. Before him was everything he could find on Sofia Bennett, or at least everything publicly available. She was 29 years old, hired as his housekeeper 6 months ago. No criminal record, no suspicious history. Everything about her seemed perfectly normal. Too normal. Someone who could teach Oliver to dance like that couldn't be just a housekeeper. A thought nagged at the back of his mind, a single word that had haunted him ever since he saw her move. Dancer. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. Sofia Bennett Ballet. At first, nothing. Then, buried beneath old articles, he found it. Young ballet prodigious appears without a trace. Jacob's pulse quickened as he clicked the link. A photograph loaded. A young woman in a pristine white ballet costume, standing on a grand stage, arms poised in perfect form. It was Sophia. The article detailed her meteoric rise in the ballet world, performances in prestigious theaters, international invitations, and then she vanished. No scandal, no public injury, just gone. Jacob clenched his jaw. Why would someone with that kind of future abandon it all to become a housekeeper? There was only one way to find out. He stood abruptly, striding out of his office and heading straight for the kitchen. Sophia was standing by the counter, meticulously wiping down the surface when Jacob entered. She glanced up at him, her expression neutral but guarded. "Mr. Caldwell?" she asked calmly. Jacob didn't respond immediately. Instead, he pulled out his phone and placed it on the counter. The article, along with her photograph, was displayed on the screen. "Explain this." His voice was cold, unwavering. For the first time since meeting her, Jacob saw a flicker of surprise cross Sophia's face. It was brief, but it was there. She looked at the screen, then back at him. "You've been searching for me." Her tone wasn't angry, just matter of fact. Jacob folded his arms. "I don't like mysteries in my home." Sophia inhaled slowly, setting the cloth down. For a moment, he thought she might refuse to answer, but after a long silence, she spoke, her voice quieter than before. "I was a dancer, a long time ago." Jacob narrowed his eyes. "You weren't just a dancer, you were a star." A bitter smile touched her lips, a star that burned out before it could shine. Jacob studied her carefully. "Why did you leave?" She hesitated. He saw the conflict in her eyes, the internal battle of whether to tell him the truth. Finally, she sighed. "Because I lost everything." Jacob said nothing, waiting. He knew if he pushed too hard, she might shut down completely. But Sophia didn't retreat. She stared down at her hands before speaking again, her voice steady but laced with an old, lingering pain. "Back then, dance was everything to me. I trained my whole life, believing I was meant to be on stage." She paused. "And I wasn't alone." Jacob tilted his head. "Who?" "Ethan," she murmured. "He was my fiancé, a dancer just like me. We grew up together, trained together. We were given the biggest opportunity of our careers, an international tour." Jacob already knew where this was going. A strange tightness coiled in his chest. "But the night before our most important performance," Sophia continued, eyes unfocused, "Ethan was in a car accident. He died instantly." Silence settled between them, thick and heavy. Jacob was not an easily shaken man, but he couldn't deny the weight in her words. "After that, I couldn't dance," Sophia admitted, her voice quieter now. "Every time I heard music, every time I stepped onto a stage, I saw him. Everything I had built my life around was gone, so I disappeared." Jacob folded his arms, his gaze softening slightly. "And now, you're teaching my son to dance." Sophia inhaled deeply, turning to face him. "Because he reminds me of myself at his age." Jacob stiffened. "What do you mean?" Sophia gave him a sad, knowing smile. "Because he doesn't smile, Mr. Caldwell." The words struck Jacob harder than he expected. He thought about Oliver, the quiet, withdrawn boy who buried himself in books and schedules. He had done everything to give his son stability, but perhaps he had forgotten something far more important. "But when he dances, he smiles," Sophia said softly. "And sometimes all a child needs is for someone to listen." Jacob turned away slightly, jaw tight. It took him a moment to speak again, his voice quieter than usual. "So, what do you plan to do?" Sophia studied him carefully. "You mean, will I force him to dance like it's some magical solution?" She shook her head. "No, I just want him to feel something again. The rest is up to him." Jacob remained silent, thoughts colliding in his mind. He had spent years priding himself on control, his work, his home, his family. But maybe, just maybe, he had been blind to the most important thing of all. Finally, he exhaled. "Oliver wants to compete in a dance tournament." Sophia didn't look surprised. "I know." Jacob met her gaze, his own sharp and unwavering. "I don't want to see my son fail." Sophia's lips curved slightly, a knowing look in her eyes. "And I don't want to see him give up before he's even tried." Jacob stood by the doorway, silently watching. In front of him, Sofia Bennett was no longer the quiet housekeeper. She had transformed into a true coach, strict, patient, but relentless. Oliver stood in the center of the practice room, sweat beading on his forehead. He moved in time with the rhythm, attempting the turn Sophia had just instructed him to do. "Again," Sophia said, her tone firm but composed. Oliver exhaled sharply, wiped his brow, and reset his stance. He tried again. Still not perfect. Again. Jacob felt a tightness in his chest as he watched Oliver repeat the same motion over and over. But what surprised him most was that his son never complained. Oliver wasn't the hesitant boy he once was. He kept trying. He wanted to get better. "Good," Sophia nodded when Oliver finally completed the spin correctly. "But you can do even better." Jacob observed her closely, intrigued by the way she trained his son. Sophia didn't coddle Oliver. She didn't give him easy praise. She pushed him. She challenged him. And Oliver rose to that challenge. As time passed, the training intensified. Long evenings, endless repetitions, sweat-soaked floors. But Oliver never quit. Jacob, though he would never admit it, found himself drawn into his son's journey. He attended most training sessions, standing quietly in the corner, watching every move Oliver made. One evening after practice, Oliver sat at the dining table, staring at his untouched plate of food. Jacob noticed the way his son's leg bounced slightly under the table. "Nervous?" "What's on your mind?" Jacob asked, his voice quieter than usual. Oliver hesitated. "There's another dancer in the competition. His name is Liam Parker." Jacob nodded, waiting. Oliver bit his lip. "He's won 2 years in a row. He messaged me today, told me I don't stand a chance." Jacob studied his son, then spoke slowly. "Do you know why he's saying that?" Oliver shook his head. Jacob leaned forward, his voice steady. "People only try to break you down when they see you as a threat." Oliver's eyes widened slightly, something shifting in his posture. "You really think so?" Jacob nodded firmly. "I know so." For the first time in their conversation, Oliver smiled. Small, but determined. "Then I'll prove him wrong." Jacob exhaled, watching his son. Oliver wasn't the same boy he once was. The backstage area buzzed with nervous energy. Young dancers stretched, whispered with their coaches, mentally preparing for their performances. The air was thick with anticipation. Oliver Caldwell stood among them, adjusting the straps on his dance shoes. No matter how much he had trained, his palms were still slick with sweat. He wasn't afraid to dance. He was afraid to fail. Jacob stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching his son. For the first time in his life, he felt powerless. He had built a life around control, around ensuring everything went according to plan, but today there was no plan. Today, Oliver had to step onto that stage alone. A hand landed gently on Oliver's shoulder. Sophia stood beside him, calm and unwavering. "Breathe," she said simply. Oliver inhaled deeply, his nerves settling ever so slightly. "You've done everything you can," Sophia continued. "Now, all that's left is to dance." Jacob watched from a distance, an unfamiliar feeling creeping into his chest. There was something between them, something he couldn't quite reach. He clenched his jaw. Now wasn't the time for reflection. Next on stage, Oliver Caldwell. Oliver swallowed hard and turned. His eyes met his father's, searching, questioning, for reassurance, for approval. Jacob gave a single nod. Go. Oliver took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. The lights were blinding. The silence in the audience pressed against him like a weight. What if I forget? What if I fall? Then he saw them. His father sat in the front row, watching, not with judgment, but with something steady, real. Beside him, Sophia gave the smallest nod. The music began. Oliver let go. He moved without thinking, each step flowing into the next, not just with technique, but with feeling. The very thing Sophia had taught him mattered most. Then came the hardest part, a turn into a leap, one he had failed more times than he could count. His breath hitched. For a split second, doubt crept in. What if I fail? What if Santiago was right? His heart pounded. But then he saw them, his father and Sophia, their eyes filled not with expectation, but unwavering belief. Something inside him steadied. He took a breath, pushed off the floor. Time slowed, and then he landed. Light, steady. The music stopped. A second of silence. Then the applause erupted. Oliver stood there, chest rising and falling, sweat dripping down his temple. But in that moment, he knew he had done it. Jacob rose from his seat, clapping slowly. Sophia too, her eyes gleaming with pride. The results were announced. Liam Parker won first place. Oliver clenched his fists but forced himself to stay composed. Then, we would also like to present a special award for artistic expression, one that recognizes not just skill but passion, emotion, and heart. This award goes to Oliver Caldwell. The crowd erupted again. Oliver blinked in shock. As he accepted his medal, he turned to the audience. Jacob looked at his son. For the first time, he didn't care about the outcome. He only cared about what he saw in Oliver's eyes, a confidence that had never been there before. The night air was crisp outside the theater. Oliver stepped out, his fingers brushing over the cool surface of his medal. Jacob and Sophia stood waiting. Jacob studied his son for a long moment before placing a hand on his shoulder. How do you feel? Oliver tightened his grip on the medal, considering his answer. Proud. Jacob nodded. Good. They walked toward the car, but before getting in, Oliver turned to Sophia. Can I keep training? Sophia smiled but didn't answer. Instead, she glanced at Jacob, as if the decision wasn't hers to make. Jacob met her gaze, then looked back at Oliver. He inhaled deeply before nodding. Of course. We're just getting started. Oliver's smile widened, not because of the medal, but because he knew this was only the beginning. Jacob watched his son, and for the first time in a long while he felt it too. Not just pride, but something deeper. Hope. That night, the Caldwell house was quiet. Oliver had fallen asleep, still wearing his medal, as if he didn't want to let go of the moment. Jacob stood on the balcony, a glass of wine in hand, staring at the stars. But his mind wasn't on the night sky. He was thinking about Sophia. Soft footsteps echoed behind him. He turned to see her standing there, wrapped in a light coat, her hair cascading over her shoulders. I need to tell you something, Jacob said, his voice steady but filled with something deeper. Sophia tilted her head, waiting. Jacob took a breath. For years, I believed that control was the key to happiness, that if I planned everything perfectly, I could protect the people I love. But then you came along, and you proved me wrong in the most beautiful way. He set down his glass and stepped closer. You helped my son find himself again. But it wasn't just Oliver. It was me too. Sophia opened her mouth to respond, but Jacob gently took her hand. I never knew what I was missing until you. I love you, Sophia. Her eyes widened, not with fear, but with something else. Jacob slowly knelt down, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Be a part of this family. Let me protect you, the way you've protected Oliver. Sophia stared at him for a long moment, her heart pounding. 1,000 thoughts raced through her mind. Fear, hope, disbelief. She had spent years running, believing she had lost everything, But now, standing here looking into Jacob's eyes, she realized something. She wasn't lost anymore. She had found a home. Her lips trembled before curving into a real, deep, emotional smile. Yes! Jacob let out a breath, a rush of relief and joy washing over him as he slid the ring onto her finger. The wedding took place on a warm, golden afternoon. Oliver stood in the front row, dressed in a small suit, his eyes shining as he watched his father and Sophia exchange vows. When Jacob leaned in to kiss his new wife, the sound of applause filled the air. Oliver looked at his father, then at Sophia, and smiled, the happiest smile of his life. Their family was complete. No more loss, no more emptiness. Only love, connection, and a brand new beginning.